Imagine it's October 1928, and while most newlyweds are settling into quiet domestic life, Glenn and Bessie Hyde are planning the adventure of a lifetime. Not for them the typical honeymoon suite or romantic getaway. No, this young couple had their sights set on something far more ambitious and infinitely more dangerous. Glenn Hyde, 29, was an experienced outdoorsman with dreams of making history. His new bride, Bessie, just 22, was an artist from West Virginia who had traded her paintbrush for a paddle. Their plan? To raft the entire length of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Something only a handful of people had ever accomplished, and never a woman. But this wasn't just about adventure. Glenn had his eye on a very specific prize, breaking the speed record for navigating this treacherous stretch of water. The Colorado River through the Grand Canyon was a monster, a churning, violent force of nature that had already claimed numerous lives. The rapids had names that struck fear into even experienced river runners. Lava Falls, Crystal Rapids, Hermit Rapids, each one a potential death trap. What makes this story even more remarkable is the time period. This was 1928. Women barely had the right to vote, and the idea of a female tackling one of America's most dangerous waterways was almost unthinkable. Bessie would become only the second woman ever to attempt this journey, and the first to try it in such a makeshift vessel. Their craft? A homemade wooden scow, essentially a flat-bottomed boat that Glenn had built himself. No modern safety equipment, no GPS, no rescue helicopters on standby. Just two young people in love, armed with determination and a boat that looked more like a floating coffin than a vessel capable of conquering America's most dangerous river. As they pushed off from Green River, Utah on October 20th, 1928, they were filled with excitement and dreams of glory. Bessie kept a detailed diary of their journey, documenting their progress and her thoughts as they navigated the early, calmer stretches of the river. The entries paint a picture of a couple deeply in love, sharing an incredible adventure. But the Colorado River doesn't care about love stories. It doesn't care about dreams or records or young couples with their whole lives ahead of them. The river has its own agenda, and it's written in the bones of those who underestimated its power. What Glenn and Bessie didn't know as they laughed and planned their route through those first peaceful miles was that they were heading toward a mystery that would captivate America for nearly a century. They thought they were writing a success story. Instead, they were about to become one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in American history. For nearly a month, Glenn and Bessie's journey proceeded remarkably well. They navigated rapid after rapid, with Glenn's experience and their sturdy scow proving more than capable of handling the Colorado's challenges. Bessie's diary entries from this period show her growing confidence and genuine excitement about their adventure. Then came November 18, 1928, a date that would be forever burned into the annals of Grand Canyon history. Near Havasu Canyon, another river party encountered the Hydes. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the couple alive. The meeting seemed routine enough. River travelers often crossed paths and shared information about conditions ahead. But there was something unsettling about this encounter that wouldn't become significant until later. According to witnesses, Glenn appeared his usual confident self, eager to discuss their progress and their plans to reach Needles, California, by early December. He was animated, talking about the record they were on pace to break. But Bessie was different. The other river party later described her as appearing uneasy, withdrawn. Some accounts suggest she looked frightened, though others dispute this characterization. What's undeniable is that she seemed less enthusiastic than her husband about the journey ahead. Was this simply fatigue from weeks on the dangerous river? The natural anxiety anyone would feel facing the notorious rapids still to come? Or was there something more sinister at play? The witnesses noted that Glenn dominated the conversation, making plans and discussing logistics, while Bessie remained largely silent. In 1928, this might not have seemed unusual. Women were often expected to defer to their husbands in such matters. But looking back through the lens of what happened next, every detail of this final encounter takes on an ominous weight. The other party offered to help the Hydes portage around some of the more dangerous rapids ahead, a common practice where boats and supplies are carried overland around particularly treacherous sections of river. Glenn declined. He was confident in his abilities and his boat, and perhaps more importantly, portaging would cost them precious time in their record attempt. As the two groups parted ways, the witnesses watched Glenn and Bessie disappear around a bend in the river, their small wooden scow dwarfed by the massive canyon walls rising on either side. The Colorado River swallowed them up, and that was the last time human eyes would see them alive. What happened in the days that followed? The couple had planned to reach Needles by early December, where Glenn's father was waiting to meet them. But December came and went with no sign of the Hydes. Their families grew increasingly worried as the silence stretched on. In an age before instant communication, it wasn't unusual for travelers to be out of touch for extended periods, but this was different. This was the Grand Canyon, where the margin for error was measured in heartbeats. The river kept flowing, carrying its secrets deeper into the canyon. Somewhere in those churning waters, between that final sighting and their expected arrival in Needles, Glenn and Bessie Hyde had vanished from the face of the earth. When Glenn and Bessie failed to arrive in Needles by their expected date, concern quickly turned to alarm. Glenn's father, R.C. Hyde, immediately contacted authorities and organized search parties. The Grand Canyon was a vast, unforgiving wilderness, and finding two people in its depths would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. If that haystack was filled with deadly rapids, hidden caves, and treacherous terrain. But then, on December 19, 1928, searchers made a discovery that would transform concern into horror and launch one of America's most enduring mysteries. There, floating serenely near River Mile 232, approximately 42 miles beyond the couple's last known position, was their wooden scow. But this wasn't the shattered wreckage you might expect from a catastrophic accident. The boat was completely intact, floating upright as if its occupants had simply stepped out for a moment. What the searchers found inside the boat was even more disturbing than what they didn't find. All of the couple's supplies were still there, neatly arranged as if nothing had happened. Their food stores were intact. Their camping equipment was properly stowed. Glenn's gun was still in its place. Most haunting of all, Bessie's diary was there, along with both of their coats, strange items to leave behind if they had deliberately exited the boat. The diary's final entry was dated several days after their last confirmed sighting, suggesting they had continued their journey for some time after November 18th. But the entries revealed nothing unusual, just the routine observations of their continued progress down the river. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence, no indication that the boat had capsized or been damaged in any way. It was as if Glenn and Bessie had simply evaporated, leaving their entire lives floating peacefully on the Colorado River. This discovery transformed a missing persons case into something far more sinister and puzzling. If the couple had drowned in a rapids accident, the most logical explanation, where were their bodies? The Colorado River was notorious for giving up its dead, especially in the calmer stretches below the major rapids. Bodies typically surfaced within days or weeks. More puzzling still, if they had been thrown from the boat in rough water, how had the scow remained so perfectly intact? How had all their belongings stayed so neatly in place? Rapids violent enough to throw two people to their deaths should have scattered supplies throughout the boat or swept them overboard entirely. The condition of the boat also ruled out many other potential explanations. There was no evidence of an attack by wild animals. No signs of damage from collision with rocks or other obstacles. No indication that the couple had been forced from the boat by other people. Searchers expanded their efforts, scouring the riverbanks for any trace of the missing couple. They checked caves, examined side canyons, and interviewed every person who might have had contact with the Hydes. But the canyon kept its secrets. Glenn and Bessie Hyde had vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only questions and a perfectly preserved boat that seemed to mock every attempt at logical explanation. The discovery of that intact scow marked the beginning of a mystery that would consume investigators, amateur sleuths, and canyon enthusiasts for generations to come. It was clear that whatever had happened to Glenn and Bessie Hyde, it was far from ordinary. The mysterious disappearance of Glenn and Bessie Hyde captured the American imagination in a way few cases ever have. Perhaps it was the romantic notion of newlyweds on an adventure, or maybe the complete absence of logical explanation, but for decades, theories proliferated like wildflowers after a desert rain. The official explanation, that the couple had accidentally drowned, never satisfied those who examined the evidence. The intact boat, the undisturbed supplies, the missing bodies, none of it fit the typical pattern of a river accident. So investigators, both professional and amateur, began exploring increasingly elaborate alternatives. One of the most persistent theories centered on Glenn's character and the couple's relationship. Some who knew Glenn described him as domineering, possibly abusive. In this scenario, Bessie had finally reached her breaking point somewhere in the depths of the Grand Canyon. Perhaps during an argument, she had pushed Glenn overboard or struck him with something heavy. With her husband dead, she might have staged the scene to look like an accident and then escaped to start a new life. This theory gained unexpected support in the 1970s when a woman named Georgie Clark, a well-known Grand Canyon river guide, made a deathbed confession that sent shockwaves through the community of canyon enthusiasts. Clark claimed that she was actually Bessie Hyde, that she had killed her abusive husband in self-defense and had been living under an assumed identity ever since. Clark's story was compelling. She knew details about the case that weren't widely known. She had the right age and physical characteristics. Most intriguingly, she had shown up in the Grand Canyon area shortly after the Hyde disappearance and had never spoken about her life before that time. For years, her claim tantalized investigators and amateur sleuths alike. But in 1998, DNA testing finally laid this theory to rest. Comparison of Clark's DNA with that of Bessie's surviving relatives proved conclusively that Georgie Clark was not Bessie Hyde. The confession had been either a fantasy or a deliberate hoax, but it wasn't the truth. Other theories focused on the possibility of foul play by third parties. The Grand Canyon in 1928 was a wild, lawless place in many ways. Bootleggers used remote areas to hide their operations during Prohibition. Hermits and outlaws sought refuge in the canyon's countless hiding places. Perhaps Glenn and Bessie had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see. An illegal still, a criminal hideout, or worse. This theory gained some credibility in 1971 when a skeleton was discovered in a cave near the canyon. The remains were those of a man who had died from a gunshot wound to the head, and the location and circumstances suggested it could be Glenn Hyde. But once again, forensic examination proved disappointing. The skeleton was too old to be Glenn's, and dental records didn't match. Some theorists proposed even more exotic explanations. Could the couple have been victims of a serial killer who operated in remote areas? Had they encountered dangerous wildlife that had somehow disposed of their bodies completely? Were there geological features, hidden whirlpools or underground caverns, that could have swallowed them without a trace? Each new theory brought renewed interest in the case, but none provided the definitive answers that everyone sought. The Grand Canyon kept its secrets, and Glenn and Bessie Hyde remained as vanished as if they had sailed off the edge of the earth. What made the case even more frustrating was the occasional false alarm. Over the decades, various items were found that seemed to offer new clues: pieces of equipment, scraps of clothing, human remains. Each discovery brought hope that the mystery might finally be solved, but invariably, closer examination proved that the items were either unrelated to the hides or too degraded to provide useful information. The case became a cottage industry of sorts, with amateur investigators, documentary filmmakers, and true crime enthusiasts all taking their turn at trying to crack the puzzle. Books were written, theories were debated, and supposed new evidence was analyzed and reanalyzed. But the canyon's stone walls remained silent, holding their secrets as tightly as they had for nearly a century. Nearly a century has passed since Glenn and Bessie Hyde vanished into the depths of the Grand Canyon, and we are no closer to solving their disappearance today than we were in 1928. Despite decades of investigation, countless theories, and advances in forensic science, the fate of the honeymooning couple remains one of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. What makes this case so enduringly fascinating is not just the absence of the victims, but the presence of so many tantalizing clues that seem to point in different directions. The perfectly preserved boat suggests a deliberate departure rather than an accident. The undisturbed supplies indicate that whatever happened was sudden and unexpected. The missing bodies could mean anything from successful escape to complete destruction. Modern investigators have applied contemporary techniques to the old evidence, but the passage of time has not been kind to the case. Potential DNA sources have degraded beyond usefulness. Witnesses are long dead. The river itself has changed dramatically since 1928, with dams and diversions altering its flow and character. The Grand Canyon that Glenn and Bessie navigated is, in many ways, a different river than the one that flows today. Yet new technologies continue to offer hope. Ground-penetrating radar can search for buried remains in ways that weren't possible decades ago. Satellite imagery can reveal features and formations that might have been missed by ground searchers. Computer modeling can simulate river conditions and predict where bodies or debris might have traveled under 1928 conditions. Some investigators believe the answer lies in understanding the specific conditions the couple would have faced in late November 1928. River flows, weather patterns, and seasonal factors all could have played a role in their fate. Perhaps they encountered a flash flood from a side canyon, a phenomenon that can turn a peaceful river into a raging torrent in minutes. Maybe they were caught in a sudden storm that made navigation impossible. Others focus on the human element. Glenn's determination to break the speed record might have led him to take risks that a more cautious traveler would have avoided. Bessie's inexperience could have made her a liability in a crisis situation. The stress of weeks on a dangerous river might have frayed their relationship to the breaking point. The most haunting possibility is that we already know everything we're ever going to know about the Hyde disappearance. The evidence that exists, the boat, the supplies, the diary entries, the witness accounts, might be all that history has preserved of their final days. The Colorado River might have claimed them so completely that no trace will ever be found. But that hasn't stopped people from looking. Every year, river runners traversing the Grand Canyon keep their eyes open for any sign of the missing couple. Hikers exploring side canyons sometimes stumble upon old equipment or remains that spark new hope, though these discoveries invariably prove unrelated to the Hydes. The case has become part of Grand Canyon folklore, passed down from guide to guide, visitor to visitor. Glenn and Bessie Hyde have achieved a kind of immortality through their disappearance, remembered not for the record they hoped to set, but for the mystery they became. Perhaps that's fitting somehow. The Grand Canyon is a place where human plans and ambitions are reduced to insignificance by the vast scale of geological time. The river that carved these mighty canyons over millions of years was never going to be conquered by a wooden boat and two young people in love, no matter how determined they were. In the end, Glenn and Bessie Hyde's story is both uniquely their own and universal. It's a reminder that the wilderness doesn't care about our dreams, our plans, or our desires. It operates by its own rules, and those who enter its domain do so at their own risk. The Colorado River continues to flow through the Grand Canyon, carrying the occasional river runner past mile 232, where the Hyde's boat was found floating empty. The canyon walls still echo with the sound of rushing water, but they keep their secrets locked away in stone and shadow. Glenn and Bessie Hyde set out to make history. Instead, they became part of the Grand Canyon's eternal mystery. Two young lovers who sailed into legend and never returned.